Old houses remember. They remember footsteps, voices, smells, and touches. My house remembers too much. I know every floorboard, every crack in the walls. If I close my eyes and reach out my hand, I can find the light switch or the doorknob without fail. Sometimes I think the house knows me better than my own daughter. The morning began as usual. I woke up around 6. The truck driver habit stays with me despite 10 years of retirement. I made myself some tea and sat by the window, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the roofs of the neighboring houses in warm hues. Pittsburgh woke up slowly. It was a Tuesday, an unremarkable Tuesday. The morning tea party ritual I'd kept after Attilia's death. Once upon a time, the two of us sat here, silently watching the sunrise. Words were unnecessary. A light touch of the hand was enough. Now I sit alone, but sometimes I feel her presence. 6 years have passed, and I still think she's about to enter the kitchen, fixing her red hair. The ringing of the phone brought me back to reality. I didn't even have to look at the screen. There's only one person who calls me at 7 in the morning on Tuesdays. "Good morning, Maeve," I said, answering the phone. "Daddy, what's taking you so long?" My daughter's irritated voice sounded as if I had already done something wrong. "I worry when you don't answer right away." I was silent about the fact that the phone only rang twice before I answered it. There's no point in arguing. "There's nothing wrong with me, daughter. Just enjoying my morning tea." "Tea again?" "Dad, your doctor told you to watch your blood pressure. Caffeine's not good for you." "Green tea has almost no caffeine," I replied, knowing it didn't matter. It was important to Maeve to point out my mistakes, not to get to the bottom of it. "Never mind. Barnaby and I will stop by your place tonight, about 6 o'clock. There's something important we need to discuss." I shuddered. Something important lately meant only one thing. Another conversation about how I'd be fine in a comfortable retirement home where professionals would take care of you, Dad. "Maeve, if it's about Sunny Hills again..." "Daddy," her voice got even more annoyed. "We just want to take care of you. At your age, it's dangerous to live alone in a house this big. What if something happens? At my age, I'm 68, and I can still run a mile faster than my son-in-law Barnaby, and his beer belly can walk half of it." "Nothing's going to happen to me," I said as calmly as I could. "I have a panic button, and Elspeth comes by every day." "That old lady?" Maeve snorted. "She's going to need a sitter herself soon." "Okay, we'll discuss it tonight. And please make some decent appetizers. Those cheese crackers you made last time were awful." I sighed, looking at the phone's dim screen. When did my little Maeve turn into this bossy woman? I remember her sitting on my lap, asking me to tell her a story, laughing so hard the panes in the window shook. Now every conversation we have is like walking through a minefield. Left alone, I walked slowly up to the second floor and stopped in front of the door to Maeve's former room. Now it's something like a warehouse of memories. Boxes of photos, old toys, school awards. Maeve had long ago taken everything she considered valuable. The rest she calls junk. But to me, everything here is a piece of the past. I pulled out an old photo album with a worn leather cover. On the first page is Atelier and me, young, smiling, standing in front of this very house. I'm in my driver's overalls. She's in a simple chintz dress. In my hands are the keys to the house and a sign with the inscription, "Finally a Home." 1981. It wasn't easy to buy this house. We saved money on everything. I took extra flights, and Ottilia worked part-time sewing in the evenings, even though she was tired after her shift at the hospital. But we managed. The house wasn't new even then, built in the 50s, with a bad layout and in need of repair. But it was ours. The first thing we did was to paint the front door bright blue. "The door to our happiness must be visible from afar," Ottilia used to say. I turned the page. Maeve, very tiny, sleeping in her crib. She's about 6 months old here at most. Ottilia had insisted that the nursery be east-facing. Let the first thing our daughter sees every day be the sunrise. How many plans we made back then. How we imagined that Maeve would grow up, maybe bring her husband here. How our grandchildren would run around here. It didn't work out that way. No grandchildren. Maeve and Barnaby decided children would interfere with their careers, and they see this house not as a family nest, but as an asset to be converted into money. I was closing the album when I heard a knock on the door. Elspeth McCoy, my neighbor, stood on the doorstep with a basket covered with a plaid towel. "Good morning, Oswin. I baked a blueberry pie and thought you might like a slice for your tea." She smiled. Elspeth is a treasure. A widow like me, she moved to our street about 5 years ago. We bonded after Ottilia died. Elspeth also knows what it's like to be alone after decades together. "Come on in." I stepped aside to let her in. "You're always on time." The kettle was just boiling. We settled down in the kitchen. Elspeth cut the pie and I took out our favorite cups, with a golden border and a slightly worn pattern. "Saonim, something's troubling you," Elspeth said, looking at me carefully over her glasses. I can see the wrinkles between her eyebrows. I sighed. It's hard to hide things from Elspeth. "Maeve and Barnaby are coming tonight. They'll convince me again to sell the house and move into that boarding house." Elspeth pressed her lips together. "What are you going to tell them this time?" "The same thing I always tell them, that I'm not going to move anywhere." I sipped my tea. Shornin on. "You know, sometimes I wonder if they're right. Maybe I really am too old for this house." "Nonsense," Elspeth objected firmly. "You're only 68. You're in great shape." And then, she lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "This house is a part of you. I can see you coming alive, telling stories about every corner of it. You're not just living here, you're continuing to create the history of this place." I nodded gratefully. Elspeth always finds the right words. "Maeve says I cling to the past," I admitted. "Maybe she's right. Or maybe she just doesn't understand the value of roots," Elspeth said softly. "Nowadays everyone is in such a hurry, so much in pursuit of the new, and sometimes the most valuable thing is what we already have." After Elspeth left, I decided to prepare for the visit of my daughter and son-in-law. I got out the vacuum cleaner and cleaned up the living room, although it wasn't too messy. I prepared appetizers, not just crackers and cheese, but the salmon and avocado canapes that Barnaby loves so much. Let it not be said that I don't try. When I was done with the preparations, I caught myself thinking that I felt like I was preparing not for my daughter's visit, but for the arrival of a strict committee. Maeve would always find something to complain about. Too dusty, too cold, too hot. I used to try to please, but then I realized the pointlessness of it. At 5 hours and 30 minutes, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Maeve and Barnaby always arrive half an hour early, not out of courtesy, but to take me by surprise. Not this time. "Daddy, are you home?" came Maeve's voice, accompanied by the jingle of keys. She still had the keys to my house, though I'd hinted several times that it was unnecessary. "In the living room," I said, adjusting the starched tablecloth. They walked in together, Maeve in front, Barnaby half a step behind. My daughter was tall, slender, her brown hair in a perfect bun, business suit, minimal makeup, clean lines. She's the epitome of focus and purpose. Barnaby seems pale next to her, medium height with a bald spot and a guilty smile. "Hello, Daddy." Maeve kissed me on the cheek, leaving a trail of lipstick. "You look good." It was a lie. In her eyes, I saw the usual assessment. Too thin, too pale, too old. "Hello, Oswin." Barnaby shook my hand. "How's your arthritis?" "I don't have arthritis. I never had arthritis. But Barnaby is somehow sure that at my age I must have all the possible diseases of old age." "I feel fine," I replied. "Have a seat. I've prepared some appetizers." Maeve glanced around the table and nodded. I guess I'd gotten the menu right this time. "How are sales this month?" I asked, trying to start a neutral conversation. Maeve works as a realtor for a prestigious real estate agency, and usually talking about work puts her in a good mood. "Fine," she smiled, sincere for the first time. "I sold that mansion in Shadyside. Remember I told you about it? 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a garden with a pool." "The $2 million one?" I clarified, though I remembered perfectly well. Maeve had talked about that house every time I'd seen it for the last 3 months. $2,100,000, she corrected proudly. "And you know what the best part is? The neighborhood is getting more and more upscale. Prices are going up every month. I saw her and Barnaby look at each other. It's starting to happen." "Speaking of rising prices," Barnaby coughed. "Maeve and I did a little research on the real estate market in your neighborhood. Your neighborhood, not your or our. It was like they'd already mentally separated me from this place." "Yeah?" I tried to keep my voice neutral. Prices have gone up here too, Barnaby continued. A lot, especially for good houses in good condition like yours. That's good, I shrugged. So I'd made a good investment 40 years ago. Maeve tapped her nails impatiently on the table. Dad, you don't understand. This house is worth almost 5 times as much now as when you bought it. That's a huge amount of capital that's just lying around dead weight. It's not so dead, I argued. I live in it. But you could live in it much more comfortably. Maeve stepped forward. Sunny Hills has everything you need. Medical staff around the clock, 3 meals a day, recreational programs. And it costs only a third of the price of your house, said Barnaby. The rest of the money can be invested or, well, spend it on things you like. Or give it to you, I finished mentally. That's what this whole conversation is about. I already told you I don't want to move, I said firmly. I'm fine here. Dad, be reasonable. Maeve switched to her favorite argument. Mom would want you to be safe, taken care of. She would have realized that at your age it's not wise to live alone. Mentioning Attilia was a dishonest ploy, and Maeve knew it. I felt anger rising inside me, but held back. Your mother wanted our house to stay in the family, I said quietly. She talked about it before she died. It was true. Attilia had talked about the house often in her last days, how she loved every corner of it, how she hoped it would always be a haven for us. Promise me you'll keep it safe for our family, she begged. And I promised, though now I'm no longer sure I understood her correctly then. Maeve frowned. Daddy, times change. Mom couldn't foresee how the real estate market would change. It's an unaffordable luxury to own a house like this now. It's not a luxury to me, it's a home, I repeated stubbornly. Okay, Maeve agreed abruptly. Let's look at it this way. What if you could help your family and still have a comfortable old age? Wouldn't that make sense? I was wary. Maeve never backed down so easily. What kind of help were we talking about? Barnaby and Maeve exchanged glances again. You see, Dad, Maeve began cautiously, Barnaby and I have an opportunity to invest in a very promising project, but we lack the initial capital. That's it. It all makes sense now. And you want me to sell the house and give you the money? I asked you directly. Not give it to you, but invest it, Barnaby corrected. It's a good investment, Oswin. In a couple of years, you'll have twice as much. I looked at my daughter. Once I could read her eyes like an open book. Now she was a stranger with an impenetrable gaze. And what is this project? I asked, even though I knew I wouldn't believe a word of it. Barnaby perked up. It's an innovative startup in the financial technology sector. We are developing a platform that will allow people to invest in real estate without buying an entire property. This is the future of the market. It sounded like another pyramid scheme. I've seen enough of these innovative projects in my life. How much do you need? I asked, just to find out the scale of their appetite. About $300,000 to start with, Barnaby answered carelessly, as if it were a small thing. That's about half the cost of your house after you've paid for the boarding house for a few years. I exhaled slowly. $300,000. Half the value of the house that Attilia and I had invested not only money in, but also a piece of our souls. I need to think about it, I said, realizing that it was effectively a rejection. Maeve realized that too. Dad, there's nothing for you to think about. It's a win-win for everyone. You'll get a comfortable life without having to worry about the house, plus a good profit in a couple years. We can grow the business. Everybody wins. Except for this house, which is going to be torn down to be replaced by an apartment complex, I said, watching my daughter's reaction. Maeve didn't blink an eye. Progress is inevitable, Dad. The neighborhood is changing. Soon there won't be any of these old houses left here at all. What about the promise I made to your mother? I asked quietly. To keep the house for the family? Maeve waved her hand irritably. Dad, you're taking everything too literally. What Mom meant was that you should use the house for the good of the family. And right now, the best way to do that is to sell it and invest in our future. I looked at my daughter and I didn't recognize her. When had she learned to manipulate words and feelings so cleverly? When did material possessions become more important to her than memories and promises? So, I really need to think about this, I repeated firmly. This is a big decision. Of course, Daddy, Maeve smiled. but the smile didn't touch her eyes. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait. When they left, I sat in the silence of the living room for a long time. It was getting dark outside the window, but I didn't turn on the light. In the semi-darkness of the room, I thought I could see Otilia's silhouette in her favorite chair. Promise me you'll keep it for our family, her voice echoed in my head. But what if Maeve is right? What if Otilia didn't mean the house itself, but what it could give our family? What if by clinging to these walls I was betraying the true meaning of her request? I walked to the window and looked out onto the dark street. Opposite, in Elspeth's house, a warm light was burning. She must be waiting for tomorrow morning to find out how our meeting went. What am I going to tell her? That my own daughter only sees me as a source of funding for her husband's dubious schemes? At that moment, for the first time, I seriously considered for the first time that maybe it was really time for me to let go of this house. Not to move into a boarding house or to invest in Barnaby's project, but for my own sake, to let go of the illusions of a family happiness that no longer existed. It was a chilly morning. October Pittsburgh greeted me with low clouds and a drizzle that seemed to penetrate my bones. On days like this, I felt Otilia's absence especially keenly. She always had a way of making even the cloudiest day brighter by making ginger tea, pulling out an old woolen blanket, and we would listen to music together while the rain drummed on the roof. It had been 3 days since Maeve and Barnaby's visit, but their offer to sell the house and invest in their project was still on my mind. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, and it wasn't just my attachment to the house. I decided to go for a walk despite the weather. I pulled on the old raincoat Otilia had given me for my 60th birthday and stepped outside. Cold drops immediately danced on my hood. My path lay toward the center of town. On Fridays, I usually went into the old bank on Market Street to withdraw some cash for the week and to have a word with Felix Gastrell, an old friend of mine. We met back in the 80s when I was taking out a mortgage on a house. Felix was a young professional then, and now he is the head of the lending department. But unlike many, the high position did not spoil him. He remained as friendly and honest. The bank met me with silence and cool air-conditioned air. Despite technological progress and the possibility to withdraw money from any ATM, I prefer to do it the old-fashioned way or through a cashier. Maybe it's old-fashioned, but I like human interaction, even if it's only fleeting. Sadnam. Good morning, Mr. Sallow. The young cashier smiled. The usual. Good morning, Emily. Yes, the usual. I nodded, holding out my card. While she processed the transaction, I looked around. Felix was nowhere to be seen, and that made me a little sad. I was hoping to have a word with him. Looking for Mr. Gastrell? Emily caught my eye. He's in his office today. Said if you came by, to invite you in. That was unusual. Usually we met in the common room and chatted standing up, but this was a formal invitation to his office. Is something wrong? I asked, taking the money in the card. I don't know, sir. Emily shrugged. He just wanted me to tell her. Felix's office was at the end of the hall. I knocked, and when I heard the familiar, "Come in," I opened the door. Oswin! Felix rose from his desk to shake my hand. It's good to see you, my friend. Felix was a little younger than me. He had recently turned 62, but he looked much older. Years behind a desk hadn't been good for his figure, and the constant stress had left deep wrinkles on his face. But his eyes remained lively and penetrating. Have a seat, he pointed to the chair across from him. Coffee? No, thanks. I sank into the chair. Emily said you wanted to see me? Felix nodded, suddenly serious. Yes, I wanted to talk to you, informally. He lowered his voice. It concerns your son-in-law, Barnaby Tumbler. I tensed up. Barnaby and Felix were unlikely to have crossed paths unless... Is he a customer of your bank? He was, Felix pursed his lips. Look, Oswin, what I'm about to say is not exactly in accordance with our confidentiality policy, but we've known each other for 30 years, and I consider you a friend. I wouldn't forgive myself if I didn't say something. You're scaring me, Felix. I tried to smile, but it wasn't very convincing. Your son-in-law is in serious financial trouble. Felix interlocked his fingers on the table. A month ago, we denied him a large loan. It was the 5th rejection in the last 6 months. I felt a chill run down my spine. The 5th? But why would he need so many loans? According to the documents he'd provided, it was for business development. Some kind of financial platform. Felix shook his head. But the thing is, his previous loans are already overdue. He's reborrowing from some banks to pay others. A classic debt trap. I remembered a recent conversation I had with Maeve and Barnaby. $300,000 for an innovative startup. It all made sense now. What about their house? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. It's mortgaged to the highest bidder, Felix confirmed. That's not all. After we turned him down, Barnaby went to private lenders. You know, those guys who don't care much about credit history, but charge huge interest rates. Loan sharks, I said grimly. Exactly, Felix sighed. Oswin, I don't know what's going on in your family, and I don't want to interfere. But if Barnaby approached you for money, be careful. I nodded, digesting the information. So it's not about a prospective business. They just need money to cover their debts. And to do that, they're willing to put me in a nursing home and sell the house that Maeve grew up in. Ekron. Thank you, Felix. I looked him in the eye. You may have just saved me from a very big mistake. We talked some more about the weather, about Felix's children, about his plans for retirement, which was due in a year, but my thoughts were far away. I was trying to figure out if Maeve knew the reality of the situation. Could it be that Barnaby was hiding the extent of the problems from her? Or had they both decided to use me as a last chance to avoid financial ruin? As I left the bank, I felt the rain intensify, but I didn't feel like going home. I needed to think, and I think best when I'm on the move. I headed toward Shenley Park, despite the weather. The park was deserted, only the occasional lone jogger in brightly colored raincoats. I walked along the wet paths, listening to the rustle of droplets on leaves, and tried to put things in perspective. $300,000. Half the value of my house. For me, it was a fortune, accumulated through years of hard work. For Barnaby, it was just a way to temporarily plug a financial hole that appeared to be getting bigger. And Maeve, has my girl turned into a calculating predator, ready to rob her own father? Or was she also a victim of circumstances, entangled in the net woven by her husband? Reflections interrupted the phone call. Elspeth's name came up on the screen. Oswin, darling, where are you? Her voice sounded concerned. I came to see you, but you're not home. It's raining outside. I'm in Shenley Park, I answered. I thought I'd take a walk. In this weather? Elspeth clearly didn't approve of my choice. You'll get soaked to the skin and sick. Come back at once. I've made dumpling soup. I'll bring you a hot portion. It was useless to argue with Elspeth. Besides, the prospect of hot soup and friendly conversation seemed very attractive now. All right, I gave in. I'll be home in 20 minutes. When I returned, Elspeth was already waiting for me on the porch under a large umbrella, thermos in hand. My God, you look like a wet chicken, she exclaimed as I approached. Get inside and change. I didn't argue. Elspeth walked me to the door, waited for me to open it, and followed me into the house. Go take a hot shower, and I'll heat up some soup, she commanded, heading for the kitchen with the confidence of someone who knew where everything was. 15 minutes later, I was sitting at the kitchen table in front of a steaming bowl of soup, having changed into dry clothes. Elspeth sat across from me, watching me intently as I ate. It's delicious, I praised sincerely, sending another spoonful into my mouth. Grandmother's recipe, Elspeth smiled. Semoton, now that you're warm and eaten, maybe you can tell me what's bothering you? I looked up at her. What makes you think anything is bothering me? Oswin Sallow, Elspeth looked at me sternly over her glasses. I know you well enough. Normal people don't walk in the pouring rain for no good reason, especially people your age, with your pragmatic approach to life. I sighed. Elspeth really knew me well. We'd grown close over the years, and she was often the only person I could talk to. You're right, I admitted. I learned something today. Unpleasant. About my son-in-law and possibly my daughter. I told Elspeth about the conversation with Felix, about Barnaby's financial problems, about the attempt to get my money. With each word, Elspeth's face grew more and more somber. Akum. Bastards, she exhaled when I was done, using my own father as an ATM machine. I'm not even sure if Maeve knows the whole truth. I tried to soften the situation. Maybe Barnaby is hiding the extent of the problem from her. Don't kid yourself, Oswin. Elspeth shook her head. Maeve is not a naive girl. She's a realtor working with real estate and finance. She couldn't help but notice that their family budget was falling apart. I wanted to object, but I knew Elspeth was right. Maeve had always been practical and attentive to detail. Financial problems of this magnitude could hardly have escaped her attention. I don't think I know my daughter very well, I admitted quietly. When did she become so calculating? Elspeth gently covered my hand with hers. People change, Oswin. Sometimes not for the better, especially when it comes to money. Money often reveals a person's true colors. But this is my daughter. I felt a lump in my throat. My blood. How can she do this? Blood doesn't guarantee anything, Elspeth sighed. My own sister hasn't spoken to me in 20 years because of our parents' inheritance. And we grew up together, sharing the same room, the same toys. I knew the story. When Elspeth's parents died, leaving a small house and some savings, my sister demanded to sell everything and divide the money. Elspeth wanted to keep the house where their childhood had passed. The conflict ended in a complete breakdown of the relationship. And what are you going to do? Elspeth asked after a pause. I don't know, I honestly answered. I don't know yet. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. She squeezed my hand. Just remember, your house is your house. You don't have to sell it if you don't want to, and you don't have to save Barnaby from the consequences of his own decisions. I nodded gratefully. Elspeth's support meant more to me than she could have realized. After she left, I sat in the living room for a long time, looking at the family photos on the walls. Maeve as a baby, smiling, with 2 pigtails, on a swing I'd made for her myself in the backyard. Maeve as a teenager, serious, in a prom dress. Maeve with Barnaby on her wedding day, happy, beautiful, full of hope. When did everything change? When did my loving daughter turn into a woman willing to manipulate her father for money? The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my musings. Maeve stood on the doorstep, drenched from the rain, with a tense expression on her face. Daddy, can I come in? We need to talk. I stepped back silently, letting her into the house. Something in her voice, in her look, was off. Usually confident, now she seemed scared. What's wrong? I asked as we walked into the living room. Barnaby's not home, she said quickly, nervously. He hasn't answered his cell phone since lunch. I thought maybe he'd stop by to see you. No, I shook my head. I haven't seen him. Maeve sank into a chair, clutching a wet umbrella in her hands. Something's wrong, Daddy. I can feel it. He never disappeared like that. I watched my daughter trying to figure out if her concern was genuine or part of some new scheme. Maybe he had a business meeting, I suggested cautiously. Friday night? Maeve shook her head. Besides, he'd give me a warning. He always gives notice. I decided to test my hunch. Maeve, does Barnaby have, financial problems? She flinched and looked up at me. Why are you asking? Just a guess, I shrugged. Your sudden desire for me to sell the house and invest in your business? It looks as if you need the money urgently. Maeve turned pale. He told you? Her voice dropped to a whisper. No one told me anything. I sat down across from her. But I'm not blind, Maeve. And I'm not stupid, even though you seem to think you are. Maeve lowered her head. For a moment I thought I saw my little daughter caught up in a prank. But this was a grown woman involved in an attempt to deceive her own father. It's not what you think, she finally said. Barnaby's really growing the business. It's just, we need more time. Investors demand guarantees. Banks refuse loans without sufficient collateral. So you decided to use my house as collateral, I finished for her. The only problem is, the house belongs to me, not you. Daddy, you're being unfair. Tears glistened in Maeve's eyes. We didn't want to use you. We offered a mutually beneficial solution. You'd get a comfortable life in a boarding house and a share in the business. A business that was up to its eyeballs in debt. I didn't hide the fact that I knew the truth. Barnaby owed the banks, Maeve. And not just the banks. He went to loan sharks. She turned even paler. Where did you... It doesn't matter, I shook my head. What matters is that you tried to pull me into this adventure. Used my love for you, my memories of Attilia. For what, Maeve? For money. You don't understand. She jumped up from her chair. We're in desperate straits. If Barnaby doesn't find the money by the end of the month, we'll lose the house. And that's not all. These people who gave him the last loan, they're not the kind of people who just sue for non-payment. That's it. The fear for her husband was real. Barnaby had gotten involved with dangerous people, and now he was paying for his stupidity. How much do you owe them? I asked, already guessing the answer. About $300,000 with interest. Maeve lowered her eyes. Daddy, I know it sounds awful, but we really don't have anywhere else to turn. $300,000. Exactly the amount they wanted from the sale of my house. Not for business development, but to pay off their debts. Why didn't you tell the truth right away? I asked quietly. Why all those lies about the investment and the boarding house? Maeve turned away, staring out the window at the wet street. Barnaby thought you wouldn't agree to help if you knew the truth. That you'd despise him for his mistakes. And me too. Did you? What did you think? Yeah, she hesitated. I didn't know what to do, Dad. I was afraid. I still am. At that moment, her cell phone rang. Maeve flinched and hurriedly pulled it out of her purse. Barnaby, her voice trembled. Where are you? What? Oh my God. I'll be right there. Don't go anywhere. She ended the conversation and turned to me with a face white as chalk. I gotta go. Barnaby, he's in trouble. These people found him. What happened? I stood up, feeling my insides tighten with worry. Despite everything, Barnaby was my daughter's husband. They beat him up. A warning, they say. Maeve frantically packed her bag. We have 3 days to find the money. Otherwise, she didn't finish the sentence. Where are you going? I asked, following her to the door. To the Blue Oyster Bar on Fountain Street. Barnaby's there. She turned around in the doorway. Dad, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way. After she left, I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. The situation was even worse than I'd imagined. Barnaby didn't just owe money to the banks, but to some gangsters who wouldn't stop at violence. And Maeve, my daughter, was being dragged into this dangerous game. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Elspeth's number. Elspeth, it's me again, I said when she answered. Remember when you asked me what I was going to do? I think I know the answer now. I realized I had to act quickly, not for Barnaby's sake, who had created this situation himself with his own reckless decisions, and not even for Maeve, who was complicit in the deception, but for my own sake, to finally break the web of manipulation and start living my own life, without the constant guilt and obligations to people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. Elspeth listened to me without interrupting and then said quietly, You made the right decision, Oswin. It's time to free yourself from this toxic relationship. Whatever the price of blood, it shouldn't cost you your freedom and dignity. And in that moment, I realized she was absolutely right. It was time to take action. Thanksgiving had always been a special holiday in our family. Ottilia loved cooking turkey with cranberry sauce, baking pumpkin pie from her grandmother's recipe. Our home was filled with the aromas of spices and baked goods, laughter and conversation. Even after her death, I tried to keep this tradition alive. For the past 6 years, I've ordered food from a restaurant, but I still invited my family to get together. This year was going to be different. It had been almost 2 weeks since the night Maeve had come running to me with the news of Barnaby's beating. In that time, I hadn't heard a word from them. No calls or texts. I hadn't called either. I needed time to think about the situation and make a decision, and I made it. After long conversations with Elspeth, after sleepless nights and agonizing deliberation, I knew what I had to do, but I was in no hurry to act. I wanted to see their faces again, hear their voices, make sure I wasn't wrong. So when Maeve called and suggested, out of the blue, that we celebrate Thanksgiving at my house, just like old times, I agreed. We'll all come, she said. Maury, me, Barnaby, Aunt Doris and Uncle Harold, Cousin Miles and his wife. A big family dinner, perfect timing for important decisions. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. The weather matched my mood. Gray skies, drizzling rain, piercing wind. I stood at the window for a long time looking out at the empty garden. Bare tree branches swayed in the wind. Wet leaves stuck to the paths. Ottilia had always said that even in the dreariest weather there was beauty to be found. She saw it in everything. I wonder what she would say now, looking at our house preparing for the last family dinner. The doorbell rang at 3 o'clock sharp. First to arrive were Aunt Doris and Uncle Harold, both in their 70s but alert and active. Doris was Attilia's sister, the same red-haired, but with gray hair and the same ringing laugh. Harold is her husband, a former engineer, silent and thorough. They brought a bottle of wine and a homemade pie. Oswin, dear, you've lost weight, Doris hugged me. Are you eating well? Elspeth makes sure I don't starve. I smiled as I helped them take off their coats. That neighbor of yours? Doris squinted slyly. Is she coming tonight? No, I shook my head. It's just family tonight. Miles and his wife Veronica showed up next. Miles is the son of Attilia's younger sister, a computer programmer, silent and shy. Veronica is his complete opposite, a boisterous and outgoing elementary school teacher. They brought a bottle of champagne and a box of chocolates. Uncle Oswin, Miles shook my hand firmly. It's been a long time. How have you been? I can't complain, I smiled, trying to look more carefree than I felt. Afworm, come on in, make yourselves comfortable. Maeve and Barnaby were late. It wasn't her style. My daughter usually arrived at the exact time or even earlier. We were already sitting in the living room, discussing the latest news, when the bell finally rang. When I opened the door, I could hardly contain my surprise. Barnaby looked terrible, a black eye, an abrasion on his cheekbone, and he was moving gingerly, obviously in pain with every step. The marks of the beating Maeve had mentioned were still visible. My daughter, on the other hand, seemed unusually animated. She was holding a bottle of expensive whiskey, my favorite kind. Daddy, she kissed me on the cheek. Sorry I'm late. Traffic. I nodded silently, letting them into the house. There was something about Maeve's demeanor that made me uneasy. It was like she was preparing for a big speech, nervous, with an overly bright smile. In the living room, Barnaby's appearance caught everyone's attention. My God, what's the matter with you? Exclaimed Aunt Doris. A little incident at work. Barnaby smiled. Nothing serious. It looks serious, said Uncle Harold. Have you seen a doctor? It's all right, really. Barnaby clearly didn't want to pursue the subject. Let's not talk about sad things. It's a holiday. Maeve immediately supported her husband, offering to open the whiskey they'd brought. I saw her fill Barnaby's glass to the brim, more than he usually drank. He drained it almost in one gulp. Nerves? I'd ordered dinner at the best restaurant in town, Turkey, with traditional side dishes, salads, appetizers. Everything was beautifully set on china dishes that Attilia and I had gotten as a wedding present. I set the table in the dining room, which we only used on special occasions. Divine, Veronica exclaimed after tasting the turkey. Oswin, where did you order? At the Golden Pheasant, I answered. They specialize in holiday dinners. It must be expensive, Barnaby said, as he put a second portion on his plate. But it's worth it. The conversation at the table flowed slowly. Uncle Harold talked about his new greenhouse. Aunt Doris bragged about her grandchildren's progress. Miles and Veronica shared their impressions of their recent trip to Europe. Maeve was unusually quiet, with only occasional remarks. Barnaby continued to drink. The whiskey was joined by wine brought by Doris and Harold. When the main course was finished, I suggested we move on to dessert and coffee in the living room. Everyone readily agreed. We moved to a cozier room and I began pouring coffee into cups. Before we go any further, Maeve suddenly spoke, rising from her seat, I'd like to say a few words. Everyone turned to her. I froze with the coffee pot in my hand, feeling my insides clench in anticipation of trouble. Today is Thanksgiving, Maeve began, looking around at everyone present. Now, a day when we gather as a family and give thanks for what we have. But it's also a day when we think about the future, about making life better for all of us. She paused as if gathering her thoughts. Daddy, Maeve turned to me, you always taught me that family is the most important thing, that we should support each other in times of need. And right now, these are exactly those times for Barnaby and me. I set the coffee pot on the table, realizing where she was going with this. Barnaby and I are in a difficult financial situation, Maeve continued, looking at the rest of the family instead of at me. Our business requires investment, and the banks refuse to lend to us without sufficient collateral. What is your business? Uncle Harold was interested. I thought you worked in real estate. Yes, but Barnaby and I are developing a parallel project, Maeve smiled. A financial platform for real estate investments? A very promising direction. I noticed Barnaby fidgeting nervously with his napkin. His face was flushed, either from alcohol or tension. And what? The banks don't give money? Miles asked. There seem to be a lot of startup programs available now. Alas, they turned us down, sighed Maeve. The risks are too high, they say, but we're sure of success. We just need to get past the initial stage. How much do you need? Aunt Doris asked. 300,000, said Maeve, but we have a solution. She turned to me, and I saw in her eyes a strange mixture of determination and despair. Papa lives alone in this huge house. Maeve looked around the room. A house that requires more and more maintenance and repairs every year. At his age, it's becoming burdensome. I'm doing fine, I argued, but it was as if Maeve hadn't heard. We suggested that Dad move to a wonderful retirement community called Sunny Hills. It has everything you need. Medical staff, organized leisure activities, socialization with peers. It sounds good, Veronica said cautiously. Many elderly people prefer such places to solitude. Exactly. Maeve perked up. Daddy will be much better off there than here alone. We can sell the house. Some of the money will go to pay for the boarding house, and some of it will go to our business. In a couple of years, Daddy will get his share of the profits. Everybody wins. There was silence. I could feel the eyes of everyone present on me. They were waiting for my reaction. Maeve was looking at me too, sure that social pressure would make me agree. So, Maeve, I spoke softly but firmly, we've already discussed this. I don't want to sell the house, and I don't want to move to a boarding house. But why, Daddy? There was a pleading note in her voice. Think of us. Barnaby and I are desperate. You don't need this house, but it could save our lives. Don't exaggerate, I shook my head. Nobody's going to die because your business won't get investment. You don't understand. Maeve raised her voice. Barnaby took out a loan against our house. If we don't pay it back by the end of the month, we'll be on the street. Wait a minute, Uncle Harold intervened. You want Oswin to sell his house to save yours? That's not very fair, is it? This isn't about fairness, Maeve began to lose her temper. This is about family. It's about helping each other. Daddy could help, but he won't. Maeve, Aunt Doris said gently but insistently, Oswin has the right to decide what to do with his house. It's his property. What about my inheritance? Maeve turned to her aunt. This house should rightfully pass to me after Papa's death. I'm just asking to get my inheritance now, when I really need it. Do you hear yourself? I couldn't believe my ears. You're talking about my house like it's your property. It's like I'm already dead. That's not what I meant, Maeve tried to soften her tone. It's just that Mom always said that this house would stay in the family, that it would be mine when the time came. Attilia wanted the house to stay in the family, I agreed. But that doesn't mean I have to give it up now, when I'm still alive and well. You're selfish, Barnaby suddenly shouted, jumping up from his seat. His eyes were cloudy with drink. You sit here alone in a big house, and we have to lose everything because of your stubbornness. Barnaby? Maeve tried to calm her husband, but he pushed her hand away. No, let everyone know. He swayed, but he held his ground. Do you know what they did to my face? It's a warning from the people I owe money to. If I don't pay them back by the end of the month, they'll make things much worse. And not just to me, but to Maeve. There was a heavy silence in the room. I could see the shocked faces of my relatives. They clearly hadn't expected this turn of events. What people? Uncle Harold finally asked. You took money from gangsters? Private investors, Barnaby corrected, but his tone betrayed the truth. They're just more demanding about repayment terms. And you want Oswin to sell his house to pay off these people? Aunt Doris shook her head. That's not business anymore. It's blackmail. We're in a desperate situation. Maeve took the initiative again. Daddy is the only one who can help us, and he has to do it. It's his duty as a father. I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. Where had the caring little girl I once rocked on my lap gone? When did she turn into this calculating, manipulative woman. Maeve, I spoke calmly, though everything was boiling inside. I'm sorry for your situation, but I'm not selling the house, and I'm not moving into a boarding house. Then just sign it over to us. Maeve opened her purse and pulled out a folder of papers. I've got it all ready. I just need your signature. She tossed the folder onto the coffee table. Papers flew around, some falling to the floor. I saw the deed of gift, already filled out, with a blank line for my signature. You planned this from the beginning, I realized. All that dinner, inviting the relatives. You were counting on me not being able to say no in front of everyone. I was counting on you to be understanding, Maeve was almost shouting, that you'd finally think of someone other than yourself. Maeve, calm down. Aunt Doris tried to intervene, but my daughter ignored her. Give the house to my husband, Maeve demanded, pointing to Barnaby, who now sat with his arms around his head. He needs it more than you do. Sign the papers, Papa. Now. Miles and Veronica looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. Uncle Harold was blushing with anger, and Aunt Doris looked shocked. I think we should go, Miles finally said, rising. This is family business. We're out of place. No, stay. I shook my head. I'll go. Where? Maeve looked confused. This is your house. Exactly, I headed for the door. My home. And I won't let you manipulate me in my own home. I walked out into the hallway, grabbing my coat and hat. There were voices behind me. Maeve was yelling something. Aunt Doris was trying to calm her down. Uncle Harold was loudly indignant. I didn't listen. I opened the door and walked out into the chilly November evening. I don't remember how I got to Elspeth's house. I only remember that my feet brought me to her doorstep. I knocked, feeling my hands trembling, whether from the cold or from the shock. Elspeth opened almost immediately, as if she had been expecting me. When she saw my face, she stepped back silently, letting me into the house. What happened? She asked, helping me out of my coat. Family dinner. I grinned bitterly. Very informative. We went into the kitchen. Elspeth sat me down at the table and put the kettle on. I looked at her cozy kitchen, small but so warm, with floral curtains and a collection of porcelain cups on open shelves. It was peaceful, safe. Tell me, Elspeth asked softly, setting a cup of hot tea in front of me. And I did in about everything. About Maeve's manipulations, about Barnaby's drunken revelations, about the papers scattered around the room, about the demand to give up the house. Give the house to my husband. I repeated my daughter's words. It was as if I were some gutless old man who must obey unquestioningly. As if everything I've created all my life belongs not to me, but to her. By birthright. Elspeth listened in silence, only occasionally shaking her head. When I finished, she took my hand in hers. I'm sorry, Oswin, she said quietly. No one deserves to be treated like that by their own children. Do you know what the worst part is? I looked into her eyes. I still love her. She's my daughter, my blood. But I can't be a part of this toxic relationship anymore. What have you decided? Elspeth asked, even though she seemed to already know the answer. I'm going to sell the house, I said firmly, but not to them, and not for them. I'll sell it to start a new life. No manipulation, no guilt, no constant pressure. Are you sure? Elspeth looked at me carefully. It's a big decision. I've never been so sure. I squeezed her hand. This house, it's no longer a refuge. It's become a prison of memories and unfulfilled hopes. We sat in the kitchen for a long time, drinking tea, talking. Elspeth talked about her experience of breaking up with her sister, about how hard it was to accept that a loved one could be toxic. I listened and felt a calm slowly spill inside. It was as if after a long, grueling battle, there was finally a truce. Downlander, you can stay here, Elspeth suggested as the clock struck midnight. I have a guest room. Thank you. I nodded gratefully. I didn't want to go back there tonight. Elspeth's guest room was small but cozy. A bed with a soft mattress, a patchwork quilt she said she'd made herself, an antique dark wood dresser. On the wall, a watercolor landscape, a lake framed by autumn trees. Chiamono. I painted it when I was young, Elspeth said, embarrassed, noticing my gaze. It's nothing special. I just love these colors. It's beautiful, I said sincerely. Everything in this room is real. Alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time all night, I let myself really feel the pain. The pain of betrayal, of dashed hopes, of realizing that my own daughter only saw me as a source of money. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. But I could feel something inside me finally breaking. The bond I had tried so long to maintain. That night, I made the final decision to sever the toxic relationship with my daughter and son-in-law, to sell the house that had become a bone of contention and start a new life. A life without manipulation, without constant guilt, without having to conform to other people's expectations. Falling asleep in someone else's bed, in the home of a woman I'd known for less than a decade, but who had shown more care and understanding than my own daughter, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if I had dropped a heavy weight I had been dragging around for years. Give the house to my husband. Those words still echoed in my head, but now they didn't cause pain, but determination. Determination to act, determination to change my life, determination to finally think about myself, not about those who see me only as a purse on legs. In the morning, I'll call the real estate agency, not the one where Maeve works, of course, another one, and start the process of selling the house, my house, which will soon cease to be for the betterment of us all. The morning after spending the night at Elspeth's, I returned home. I expected to find traces of last night's scandal, scattered papers, dirty dishes, maybe even a note from Maeve, but the house greeted me with perfect order. Someone, most likely Aunt Doris, had cleaned up before I returned. On the kitchen table was a note written in familiar handwriting. Call me when you're ready to talk. Doris. I wasn't ready. Not right now. I needed to act first. Picking up my phone, I found the number for Homestead Real Estate, one of the main competitors of the company where Maeve worked. I dialed the number, trying not to think about how she'd take my move. Homestead Real Estate, how can I help you? A pleasant female voice answered the phone. Good morning, I coughed, feeling strangely nervous. I'd like a consultation about selling my house. Of course. Can I connect you with a realtor? Yes, please. A few seconds later, another voice came through the phone. A male, low, with a slight accent. Xavier Birdwhistle, senior realtor. How may I help you? The name sounded unusual to me, but I didn't think much of it. My name is Oswin Sallow. I'm looking to sell my house in the Highland Park neighborhood. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, 12 acres. Sounds interesting, Mr. Sallow. When would it be convenient for you to meet for an appraisal? The sooner the better, I replied. Maybe even today. There was a pause in the phone. Apparently Xavier was checking his schedule. I have a 4 o'clock window. Is that okay with you? Perfect, I dictated the address. Great, I'll see you at 4. Xavier sounded professional and confident. And, Mr. Sallow, if it's no secret, why did you choose our agency? Your daughter works at Prim House, doesn't she? I froze. How does he know about Maeve? Pittsburgh is a small town when it comes to real estate, Xavier explained, as if he'd read my mind. All the realtors know each other in one way or another. Yes, my daughter works at Prim House, I admitted, and that's why I came to you. It's personal. I understand. There was no judgment in Xavier's voice, only professional understanding. Don't worry. We'll handle this as delicately as possible. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at my garden. The feeling was strange, a mixture of determination and regret. I was about to sell the house I'd lived in for almost 40 years, the house where Maeve had grown up, where Ottilie and I had been happy. But now it was drenched in bitterness and disappointment. Every corner reminded me of yesterday's scandal, of Maeve's demand, of her words. Give the house to my husband. No, I couldn't stay here any longer. This house was no longer a refuge. It had become a battlefield that I didn't want to continue. At exactly 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood a tall man of about 68 with a neatly trimmed gray beard and shrewd dark eyes. He was dressed impeccably in a dark blue suit with a faint checkered pattern and a maroon tie. Minus Mr. Sallow? He held out his hand. Xavier Birdwhistle, Homestead. Come on in. I shook his hand. The handshake was firm, confident. Xavier entered the house looking around with professional interest. It's a beautiful house, he said. You can tell it's been well cared for. Khalid, my wife and I bought it in 81. I didn't know why I was giving this information. Maybe I just wanted someone else to know the history of the place. Do you live here alone? Xavier pulled out a clipboard and started writing something down. Yes, my wife died 6 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss, he nodded. May I see the house? Xavier spent the next hour methodically going through the rooms, taking notes and photographs, measuring spaces and asking questions about the condition of the utilities, the roof, the foundation. I followed him, answering questions and watching my house become a piece of real estate, a commodity on the market. Well, Xavier finally said when we returned to the living room, the house is in excellent condition and the neighborhood is upscale. I'd estimated at least 650,000, maybe even 700 if you pitch it right and find the right buyer. The amount was more than I'd expected, much more than the 300,000 Barnaby needed to pay off his debts. How long would it take to sell? I asked. Xavier shrugged. Under normal circumstances, 3 to 6 months. But, he looked at me carefully, I understand you want to move faster? Yes, I nodded. The sooner the better. Then there are two options. Xavier leaned back in his chair. First, we reduce the price by 15% and do a vigorous advertising campaign. That will attract more potential buyers, but it will still take time. And the second, I have a few clients who are looking for just such houses and are ready to pay immediately without bargaining, if the object they like. It would be quicker, but I might have to agree to a below-market price. I thought about it. Money was not my main concern. It was more important to close the deal quickly before Maeve found out and tried to stop me. Let's try the second option, I decided. How long will it take? If all goes well, 2 or 3 weeks. Xavier made a note in his clipboard. I'll be contacting potential buyers today. By the way, have you decided where you're going to move after the sale? That question caught me off guard. I was so focused on the idea of selling that I hadn't thought about the next step. No, I haven't decided yet, I admitted. Maybe I'll get an apartment somewhere in the center. Xavier rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You know, if you're interested, there's a great place about an hour south of Pittsburgh. It's a little town called Bridgewater. There's a sort of active retirement community there. People our age who want a quiet life, but without those awful boarding houses with nurses and strict regimes. Sounds interesting? I was really interested. Have you ever been there? I live there, Xavier smiled. Timron, I moved there 3 years ago after my divorce. Best decision of my life. We talked for another hour or so. Xavier talked about Bridgewater, the quiet streets with neat houses, the local community where everyone knew each other, the weekly meetings at the town library where they discussed books and shared news. It sounded idyllic, perhaps too idyllic to be true. But there was something about Xavier's story that lent itself to sincerity. If you'd like, I can show you some of the houses there when the time comes, he offered, getting ready to leave. No strings attached, just to give you an idea. Thank you. That would be helpful. I walked him to the door. I'll contact you tomorrow as soon as I hear back from potential buyers. Xavier held out his hand. And Mr. Sallow, if I may offer a word of advice, don't think of selling the house as a loss. Think of it as the beginning of a new phase of life. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Xavier proved to be a true professional. The day after our meeting, he brought the first potential buyer, a young couple with 2 children. They fell in love with the house at first sight, especially the spacious garden and the cozy nursery that had once belonged to Maeve. The price they offered was slightly lower than Xavier's original estimate of $620,000 instead of $650,000, but that was fine with me. The main thing was that they were willing to act quickly and not haggle over details. In 2 weeks, we had gone through all the necessary legal procedures. Xavier helped with the paperwork, organized the appraisal and home inspection, and contacted the lawyers. Everything happened so quickly and smoothly that it almost seemed unreal. I tried to avoid seeing Maeve, answering her calls with one-word answers and declining offers to meet. She seemed to put my behavior down to resentment after the family dinner and didn't know the real reason. When I wasn't doing paperwork, I traveled with Xavier to Bridgewater. The town was exactly as he described it. Quiet, cozy, with neat houses and friendly residents. We looked at a few houses, and I even had my eye on a small 1-story house with a veranda and garden. Smaller than my current one, but adequate for one person. The day I signed the final papers to sell the house in Pittsburgh, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness at saying goodbye to a place where most of my life had been spent, and relief at the thought that it would soon be over. Xavier and I were sitting in the notary's office, going over the last details of the contract, when the door rattled open. Maeve stood on the threshold, pale with anger, eyes blazing. "What's going on here?" Her voice shook. "Daddy, you're selling the house." I slowly rose from my chair. "Yes, Maeve, I'm selling my house." "How could you?" She stepped forward, clenching her fists. "You promised you wouldn't make any decisions without talking to me." "I didn't promise anything," I said calmly. "And this is my home, Maeve. I have the right to use it as I see fit." But, but, she seemed to gasp with indignation. "This house was supposed to be ours. We were counting on it." "Exactly," I nodded. "You were counting on my house. Without asking me, without asking me about my plans. You just thought you could have it." Xavier coughed delicately. "Maybe I should wait outside," he suggested. "No need," I shook my head. "We're almost done, aren't we?" "Daddy," Maeve rushed to me, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this. What's going to happen to us? To Barnaby? These people aren't joking. They could really hurt him. Us." I gently released my hand from her grip. "Maeve, I'm sorry about your situation. I really am. But I cannot and will not sacrifice my life, my home, to save Barnaby from the consequences of his own decisions. You're, you're betraying your family." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom wouldn't approve." The mention of Ottilia was a low blow, but I was ready for it. "Your mother wouldn't have approved of the way you tried to manipulate me using her name," I said firmly. "She wanted the house to stay in the family, yes, but I'm sure she meant a home filled with love and respect, not a battlefield for money." "How much?" Maeve suddenly asked, changing tactics. "How much will you get for the house?" "Shunam, it doesn't matter," I shook my head. "It does." She raised her voice again. "We only need 300,000. You can have the rest. Please, Dad. It's a matter of life and death." I sighed. Maeve had always had a flair for the dramatic, but now I could really see the fear in her eyes. Perhaps the threats of Barnaby's creditors were not empty. "Listen, Maeve," I said calmly but firmly, "I can't give you that money. First, because the deal's almost done. Secondly, because it won't solve the problem. Barnaby will find a way to get into more debt, and you'll come to me again." "You don't understand," she sobbed. "They threatened me. They said that if Barnaby didn't pay back the money, they'd—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the look in her eyes said it all. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was it really that serious? "Go to the police," I suggested. "We can't." Maeve shook her head. "It would only make things worse. Daddy, please, I'm your daughter. Are you really going to let anything happen to me?" I looked at her for a long moment. My daughter, my blood. The girl I once rocked on my lap. The girl I read bedtime stories to. The girl I taught to ride a bicycle. Now she stood before me, a grown woman entangled in the net her husband had created and trying to use our bond as a final bargaining chip. "I'll help you, Maeve," I said finally, "but not the way you want me to. I won't give you money to pay off Barnaby's debts. Instead, I can offer you, not him, but you, to move in with me for a while until you get the situation sorted out. I'll rent a 2-bedroom apartment." "An apartment?" She looked confused. "But, what about the house?" "I'm selling it," I reminded her. "Today." "No," she flared up again. "I won't allow it. This is fraud. You're disinheriting me." "Maeve," I rubbed my temples tiredly. "You speak as if I were already dead, and you were my heiress who had been cheated. But I am alive, and I have every right to dispose of my property." "You're betraying your family." She retreated to the door. "Shema, Mom wouldn't forgive you." "Maybe," I nodded. "But I'm doing what I think is right now. The offer of temporary housing still stands. If you really fear for your safety, you know where to find me." Maeve stared at me for several long seconds, her face contorted with anger and resentment. "You're going to regret this," she exhaled and ran out of the office, slamming the door. 2 suitcases and 3 boxes were all I'd decided to take with me from my past life. Pictures of Ottilia, a few books she loved, our wedding rings, old letters. Maeve's childhood drawings when she was still a little girl. Not a woman capable of screaming, "Give the house to my husband." Some clothes, papers, a few souvenirs from her travels. Everything else, furniture, dishes, gardening tools, stayed with the new owners or went to charity. Strange how easy it was to let go of material things accumulated over decades. I thought it would be harder. But as I went through the contents of closets and drawers, I realized that most of these things had long ago become mere background, part of the scenery, rather than anything truly important to me. What was important was writing a letter to Maeve. I sat at the kitchen table all evening, trying to find the right words. How do I explain to my daughter that I'm not abandoning her, but saving myself? That my leaving was not an act of revenge, but an attempt to start a new life free of manipulation and toxic relationships? That I still love her despite the pain she caused? In the end, the letter came up short. I didn't go into long explanations or accusations. I just wrote the truth as I saw it. Dear Maeve, by the time you read this letter, I will be long gone from Pittsburgh. I'm starting a new chapter of my life, and I need to do it without looking back at the past. I sold the house you thought was supposed to be your inheritance. But the truth is, the real inheritance isn't the walls and roof. It's the values I tried to teach you. Honesty, respect, caring for your loved ones. It's the love I always felt for you, even when you hurt me. The house was mine. I had earned it through years of hard work. I had every right to use it as I saw fit. I know you feel differently, and I'm sorry we couldn't find an understanding. I won't tell you where I'm going. Not because I don't trust you, but because I need time and space to heal and build a new life. A life where I won't constantly feel like an ATM machine, obligated to pay for other people's debts and mistakes. I will always love you, Maeve. You're my daughter, my blood. But love doesn't have to turn into chains. Sometimes the most loving thing to do is to let go. Please don't come looking for me. If someday you want to rebuild our relationship, a real, healthy relationship based on mutual respect, not financial dependence, I'd be happy to, but it must be your sincere decision. Love, your father. I sealed the letter in an envelope and left it on the kitchen table, where Maeve was sure to find it when she came to check on the house. And she would, of that I had no doubt. The last night at the house was strange. I sat in the half-empty living room, drinking tea from the only cup I had left and listening to the silence. Outside the window, rain was drizzling, typical Pittsburgh weather in late fall. Somewhere in the back of the house, a floorboard creaked, a familiar sound I'd heard thousands of times. I said goodbye to the house in my heart, thanking it for shelter and protection, for the happy years with Attilly, for Maeve's childhood. Houses don't have souls, but if they did, I'm sure this house would understand me. In the morning, Xavier arrived to help with the move. He offered to drive me to Bridgewater in his car. It would be easier than a busload of suitcases. You won't regret it, he smiled as he loaded my things into the trunk. Bridgewater is a special place. It's easy to breathe. I took one last look at the house, the blue front door that Attilly and I had painted the first day we bought it, the apple tree in the garden, planted when Maeve turned 5, the swing I made with my own hands. So many memories. But it was time to move on. The drive to Bridgewater took a little over an hour. We drove south, gradually leaving the hustle and bustle of the city behind. The scenery changed from high-rises to suburban houses, then fields and forests. Xavier talked about the town, the people who lived there, the local traditions. I listened, imagining my new life. We're almost there, Xavier said as we turned off the main highway onto a narrower road. See the sign? Bridgewater, population 2,187. The town was quiet and peaceful. Neat streets with low houses, a small square with a fountain, a few stores and cafes. No bustle, no noise, just the rustle of leaves underfoot and the friendly nods of rare passers-by. The house I bought, a small one-story cottage with a veranda and a garden, was on a quiet street 5 minutes walk from the center. Xavier helped me with my things, showed me how the heating worked and where the meters were, and then left me alone to settle in and get used to the new place. I'll introduce you to the neighbors tomorrow, he promised before he left. There are a lot of interesting people here. I think you'll find a common language. Left alone, I walked slowly around my new home. It was much smaller than Pittsburgh's 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a small dining room. But I alone didn't need much more than that. The house already had basic furniture, a bed, a couch, a dining table, and bookshelves. Everything simple, functional, no unnecessary decorations. Perfect for a new beginning. I unpacked my suitcases, arranged the books on the shelves, laid out the clothes in the closet. On the bedside table, I put a picture of Ottilia. She was smiling, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. This photo was taken on our 20th wedding anniversary, 3 years before her illness. She looked so happy, so alive. "I hope you would approve of my choice," I said quietly to the photo. "I had to break my promise about the house, but I think you would understand." In the evening, I sat on the veranda, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The air was clean, fresh, filled with the scents of the fall forest. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. An elderly couple walked past the house holding hands and nodded to me in greeting. I nodded back, feeling strangely calm. Here in this quiet town, no one knew my history. No one had any rights or expectations of me. I could just be Oswin Sallow, a retired man who had recently moved from the big city. No labels, no obligations. In the morning, I was awakened by a knock on the door. Standing on the doorstep was Xavier with a basket covered with a plaid towel. "Good morning, neighbor," he smiled. "Brought you breakfast. My neighbor Margaret makes the best blueberry muffins around, and I thought you should try them." We settled on the porch with coffee and muffins. Xavier was talking about local news. There was a literary evening at the library next Saturday, and a small fair of local artisans in the square on Sunday. "You should go," he advised. "It's a great way to get to know your neighbors." After breakfast, Xavier took me on a tour of the town. He seemed to know everyone he met, greeting me, exchanging jokes, introducing me. People were friendly, genuinely interested in how I was settling in, and invited me to visit. We visited the local library, a small building with columns where an energetic woman named Doreen worked, who immediately gave me a library card. Then we stopped at Louise's Cafe, which served the best apple pie west of Allegheny, as Xavier claimed. Louise, a full woman with kind eyes, insisted I try a slice. "First time on the house," she winked, "so you'll be sure to come back." By evening, I was dizzy with new faces and names, but strangely, I didn't feel overwhelmed or tired. On the contrary, each new acquaintance seemed to add energy, reminding me how much more interesting things lay ahead. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I gradually grew into the rhythm of Bridgewater, finding my favorite places and activities. Mornings were spent walking along the river, watching fishermen and waterfowl. In the afternoons, I often sat in the library, where Doreen recommended I join a book club for life-experienced people, as she delicately called retirees. In the evenings, I sometimes stopped by Louise's Cafe, where locals gathered to discuss the news and play chess or backgammon. The gardening club met every Wednesday at the local community center. I've never been much into gardening. Ottilia did it in her Pittsburgh home. But here in Bridgewater, I decided to give it a try. My little garden gradually transformed. There were neat beds with greens, flower beds, even a small greenhouse for growing tomatoes and cucumbers. On Sundays, I often had lunch at Xavier's. He turned out to be an excellent cook and liked to experiment with recipes from all over the world. Over lunch, we talked about everything: books, politics, life. Sometimes other neighbors joined us. Margaret with her specialty desserts, Ted and Ellen, a retired musician couple, Gerald, a former history professor with an inexhaustible supply of anecdotes. Gradually, I realized that I had found something I had never dreamed of when I left Pittsburgh: a new family. Not by blood, but by spirit. People who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. People who were easy and peaceful to be with. I tried not to think about Maeve, but sometimes the memories came flooding back. What's she doing? How did she handle Barnaby's debts? Had she found my letter? Sometimes I'd check her social media profile. Everything seemed fine there. Pictures from corporate events, vacation snaps, posts about successful real estate sales. No hints of financial problems or threats from creditors. A letter from her arrived 3 months after I left. The envelope was addressed in my name, but mailed to the Homestead Agency. Apparently, Maeve had found out which agency I'd sold the house through and thought they might know my new address. I hesitated to open the envelope for a long time. What did she write? An apology? New accusations? Another request for money? In the end, curiosity won out. The letter was printed on the letterhead of the law firm, Parker and Associates. In dry, formal language, it informed me that Maeve Tumbler, my daughter and sole heir, was demanding a fair division of the estate and claiming 50% of the amount I received from the sale of the house. Our client claims that the property in question was purchased during her parents' marriage and was therefore jointly owned property. Upon the death of her mother, Attilia Sallow, the client, as the only child, is entitled to a share of the inheritance. This was followed by legal terms and references to precedents. The letter ended with a proposal to settle the matter in pretrial order and details for money transfer. I reread the letter several times, not believing my eyes. Maeve had decided to sue me for the house I had bought with my own labor, in which I had lived for almost 40 years. The house she wanted to take from me to save her deadbeat husband from creditors? That was the last straw. I tore the letter into small pieces and threw it in the trash. Then I called my lawyer in Pittsburgh and briefly explained the situation. "Don't worry, Mr. Sallow," he reassured me. "She has no legal basis for such a claim. The house was deeded to you. You were the sole owner. Your wife didn't leave a will, but by law her share of the jointly acquired property went to you as husband. The most your daughter can expect is to contest the will when you are gone. But right now, she has no rights to your estate." That reassured me a little, but it left a residue. Maeve didn't just not understand my motives. She was determined to fight for the money in every way she could, even if it meant suing her own father. I didn't respond to the letter. I simply asked my attorney to contact Parker and Associates and explain to them the legal untenability of Maeve's claims. That was the end of our communication, at least for a while. Life in Bridgewater went on as usual. Spring had replaced winter, bringing with it the bright colors and smells of blooming gardens. My own garden was transformed. I worked hard on it, using advice from books and my garden club neighbors. One warm May day, as I was pruning the rose bushes in the front yard, an unfamiliar car stopped at the gate. Maeve stepped out of it, elegant, in an austere suit, with perfect hair. She looked exactly the same as the day we last met at the notary's office. But there was something different in her gaze. "Daddy," she stopped at the gate, hesitant to enter. "Can I talk to her?" I straightened, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves. My mind was racing frantically. How had she found me? Why had she come? What did she want? "Come on in," I nodded to the porch. "We'll sit out there." We settled on the wicker chairs. There was an awkward silence between us. Maeve was looking at my new house, at the garden, at me, as if trying to connect the image of her father from the past with the man she saw now. "You look good," she said at last. "You've lost weight, you're tanned." "Fresh air and working in the garden," I shrugged. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't hard," Maeve smiled weakly. "I'm a realtor after all. I have connections at agencies all over the state. Once I found out about Bridgewater, the rest was easy." Silence again. I waited for her to get to the point of the visit. "Dad, She hesitated for words. "I wanted to apologize for everything. For the way Barnaby and I tried to manipulate you. That letter from the lawyer, it was stupid. I was angry, hurt, scared. I didn't know what to do." I looked at her carefully, trying to see if she was sincere. "Serena, what about now?" I asked. "What about Barnaby's debts? The threats?" We divorced," Maeve lowered her eyes. "A month after you left." I finally realized what he'd gotten me into. How many lies there were in all of it. He was gambling, Dad. Not at cards, but in the stock market, which is basically the same thing. Blowing huge sums on risky investments, taking out loans to cover losses, losing again. "I'm sorry," I said, and it was true. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want my daughter to suffer. "Neither did I," Maeve grinned bitterly. "Especially sorry that I let him come between us, that I was willing to sacrifice my relationship with you for his debts." We talked for a long time that day. Maeve told me how everything fell apart after I left. Barnaby couldn't pay his creditors and they really started threatening. But instead of seeking help from his wife, he ran away. Just disappeared one night, leaving a note apologizing. Maeve had to deal with everything herself, with the creditors, with the police, with lawyers. She managed to negotiate a restructuring of some of the debts. Something had to be paid from her own savings. She sold their shared house and bought a small apartment, started her life with a clean slate. I understand how you felt, she said quietly. When you decided to drop everything and move away, sometimes it's the only way to save yourself. I nodded. It was strange, but in that moment, there was a real understanding between us, perhaps for the first time in years. I'm not asking you to come back or to help me financially, Maeve continued. I just want to, I don't know, maybe a fresh start? Get to know you as you are now. Become a part of your life, if you'll let me? I looked at her, my daughter, my blood, and saw not only the woman who screamed, "Give the house to my husband," but also the little girl with pigtails who once ran towards me with open arms. I saw the pain in her eyes, the genuine remorse, the desire to right the wrongs. It won't be easy, I said honestly. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. We're going to have to relearn a lot of things, respecting each other's boundaries, communicating without manipulation, just be a family. I'm willing to try. Maeve held out her hand. If you are too. I took her hand, feeling something inside me slowly thaw. Not full forgiveness. That would take time, but the beginning of the journey toward it. That evening, after seeing Maeve off, she promised to come back in 2 weeks over the weekend. I sat on the veranda, watching the sunset and reflecting on our conversation. About how strange life is sometimes. About how sometimes you have to lose something precious. A home, a relationship, an illusion, to gain something more important. Freedom, self-respect, honesty with yourself. Xavier, passing by, noticed me and waved. Sienna, beautiful evening, isn't it? He smiled as he approached the gate. Beautiful, I agreed. Would you like to join me? We sat on the veranda, drinking tea and talking about the upcoming festival in the town, about new books in the library, about plans for the summer. Just an ordinary evening in Bridgewater, filled with simple joys and tranquility. And I realized I had made the right choice. Breaking up a toxic relationship, selling my house, leaving Pittsburgh. I hadn't lost the past. I'd gained a future where I could be myself, live for myself without feeling guilty about it. A future where there might be room for a new, healthy relationship with my daughter. As I watched the sunset coloring the sky over Bridgewater with golden and pink hues, I felt true freedom and peace for the first time in years. There were new horizons ahead, new opportunities, a new life, and I was ready for this journey.